Welcome back to Sikistan. Today's video is going to take a slightly different kind of layout, a slightly different format from our standard video. Today we're going to be discussing the use of performance enhancing drugs in grappling or in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. We're going to play it like a kind of mock debate. I'm going to take the dark side, Eoin is going to take the side of righteousness or whatever you want to say. We're basically just going to give the arguments for and against, and this is by no means kind of our views or our personal views or what I think versus Eoin thinks or what Seeker Strength thinks. It's just the common areas or common thoughts brought up in the sport itself. So let us know what you think below. If you agree with one side versus the other, let us know. If you have any issues with our comments, please keep that to yourself. We don't really care. So my thoughts behind this are that there shouldn't be testing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. As a sport, it's a privately run sport. It doesn't really receive any state backing from anywhere. And for the next few reasons that I'm going to outline, I think it's a pretty ideal sport to not have testing in. The first reason I think you shouldn't have testing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is that it's a relatively controlled form of combat sport. So if we were to take a sport such as rugby, American football, any of these high impact sports where people are sprinting at each other and making large scale impacts on each other when they collide, I think the use of steroids, the use of performance enhancing sports in those is very, very dangerous. Those people are getting long term psychological issues and cognitive issues due to concussion, and obviously bigger, stronger, more powerful athletes who are moving faster are going to have a higher rate of concussion in those sports. In Jiu-Jitsu we have something that's quite different though. It's a submission grappling sport. If you're getting tapped out or submitted, you're getting tapped out through an armbar, an omoplata, a choke, something along the lines where somebody is putting one of your joints or one of your limbs in a very, very compromised position and you tap out because of that. On the other side, they put your neck in a compromised position and you tap out because of that, or they'll put you to sleep. Now, there are instances in competition where someone will grab an armbar and they'll just tear the armbar and that will damage the joint itself. But most of the time, people have the chance to tap out. They have the chance to regulate their own risk of injury. And in a non-competitive environment, injuries through those kind of arm locks or things like that tend to be quite rare. Many of the injuries we tend to see are from people falling back on themselves or getting put in compromised positions that aren't really controllable. So, does the use of performance enhancing drugs or the prolific use of performance enhancing drugs necessarily mean people are going to be more injured in jiu-jitsu or the injuries will be more serious? Probably not, in my opinion. If you have a very, very, very strong person who's able to tear your arm out and they want to do that in competition, you can perceive that risk and you can tap very quickly once they take a grip on you. And I don't think it's necessarily that much more dangerous if someone is on gear versus someone not being on gear. The second reason I think there probably shouldn't be testing in jiu-jitsu is that people have extremely long careers. We see people just last weekend at ADCC who are well into their 40s competing at the top level of their game, and this happens in almost no other sport. You won't get somebody in badminton, you won't get somebody in boxing, you won't get somebody in marathon running or triathlons who are achieving top level international results well into their 40s on a continuous basis. When this happens in other sports, it's talked about. Even people like Liu Zhaozhen in weightlifting, their prolonged career is into their mid to late 30s and they're seen as a massive outlier among the sport. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, you get people competing regularly at international competition well on into their 30s and 40s. Running alongside this or concurrently, you have to understand how competitive the masters divisions are in jiu-jitsu, and a lot of these masters divisions aren't going to be tested and probably shouldn't be tested either. You're getting people in their midlife able to really compete hard and train hard at a sport that they're obviously enjoying and they're reaping the benefits of it. Would this be as readily available if there was more testing? Probably not. There's probably a lot of HRT and TRT clinics helping out athletes to prolong their careers to stay physically active and to stay competitive later on in their life and enjoy the sport a bit more because of it. The third reason I think there probably shouldn't be testing in BJJ is due to the fact that there's not a direct revenue stream or income source from BJJ. So there are large scale competitions where you might have a cash prize for the winner. Certainly there are super fights and there's who's number one style competitions where there's large cash prizes. But overall, there's not a kind of general governing body in Jiu-Jitsu who will divvy out packages or divvy out salaries to the athletes. It's not like you're going into a professional soccer team, you sign a contract, agree that contract, and that might last for 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 years. In Jiu-Jitsu, it's generally athletes hustling quite hard to be able to train full time and make some sort of a living. Because of that, we see most athletes in coaching roles or as owners of large academies, or else they're traveling around the world giving seminars at the same time they're coaching. This would almost certainly not be possible without the use of performance enhancing drugs, or at the very least, you'd see people's physiques and their ability to train 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours a day being drastically diminished. Now, I know we've seen multiple jiu-jitsu athletes talk about their passive incomes in the past. We see people like Gordon Ryan making millions of dollars per year through a passive income of selling instructional DVDs. But for most people fighting in most jiu-jitsu competitions, they are coaching full time, or they own an academy, or they're traveling around coaching a lot. The final reason I think there probably shouldn't be testing in BJJ, or people shouldn't be pushing BJJ to be fully clean right now, is that it is a developing sport. All the other sports we see in the mainstream today as being these really successful large scale sporting enterprises had their glory days, had their industrial revolution if you'd like, or their main foundational years happened when all of their athletes are on gear. So in MMA, you see big promotions like Pride, like UFC, having no testing in the early days, the sport becoming very popular, and then they kind of gradually slip in testing later in life. In sports like the NFL, the NBA, the hockey in the States, all of these are unbelievably dirty sports. And then at some point in the mid to late 2000s, they kind of slip in, we do some testing as well. To what extent the testing is well, you can make your own decisions on that. Even down to the more minute sports or the more individual or niche sports like cycling, these sports all became popular using drugged athletes. Every sport needs their kind of superstar to make the sport break through into the mainstream, whether that's somebody like a Conor McGregor or an Anderson Silva for the UFC, whether it's someone like Lance Armstrong. All of these people are being hailed as the superstar. Drugs help to make those superstars. And just let BJJ have its time. Let it make a few stars. Let it be more of a household known sport. And then say whatever you want about bringing in WADA after that.
It's a great seat. I'm here to talk from the side of we should have drug testing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Boo!
So coming from weightlifting side of things, we've seen the kind of havoc drug taking and poor drug testing has reaped on weightlifting. So I feel like it would be a better scenario if BJJ had an opportunity to head this scenario off and cut it while the sport is young. So the first place we need to start on why testing should be in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, of course, the health of the athletes. Now, there's been a lot of thought recently in the last couple of years of how you can take performance enhancing drugs more safely or in a healthier manner. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, someone who's not taking performance enhancing drugs will most likely, given the same person, if we person A and B were clones of each other, that person A who didn't take performance enhancing drugs through any period of their life would almost certainly be a lot healthier if we did the same things, except for making that change where we took PEDs. That same person takes PEDs very rarely for a short period of time. Very rarely do people remain incredibly sensible with the use of PEDs. Very often they go above and beyond what needs to be done for longer than needs to be done, and very often have issues, both physical and psychological, with the use of PEDs, from the use of PEDs, and in the absence of the use of PEDs. So we have a variety of different factors, for example, all the way from coming off performance enhancing drugs to give us a massive disruption to our hormones post the use of performance-enhancing drugs. We have the increase in psychological anxiety from the use of performance-enhancing drugs. It's a well-known factor in psychology that change in hormones are a great predictor in increasing anxiety. While it might be temporarily, it is known that the increase in dosages, and a lot of users will tell you this, the more drugs you take, the more general anxiety you'll experience throughout the day. Now, if your baseline anxiety is very, very low, it won't be massively impactful. But if you're someone who's even anyway prone to anxiety, you're going to see this personality aspect of yours increase as the dosages increase. And if we're in a scenario where testing is absent, where we have zero testing at all throughout the year, then this inhibition of use will be completely gone. BJJ athletes will be absolutely untamed in their usage, as we've seen from the recent ADCC, where we'll hit that point where the most they can take is the most they will take in a lot of scenarios. So the health of our athletes here is absolutely jeopardized in terms of our organ health, heart, blood pressure, blood red cell count. When we increase this blood red cell count massively, we end up with syrup-like blood, which is very difficult for your heart to maintain moving correctly, increase our potential for clotting, strokes, heart attack. It's much harder for kidneys to operate. We disrupt the normal routine of certain hormones and thus impact other bodily functions, which are most likely negative in the long run. The impact this will probably vary from individual to individual, but the presence of these, even in that same individual, is probably unhealthy or more unhealthy than this individual had never taken these drugs. So the health of our athletes is the priority here in relation to testing. If these athletes don't take performance-enhancing drugs, the likelihood is they will be more healthier in the long run. Second, we need to move on to the image of the sport in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. The optics of a sport of some massively juiced up individuals, when we're trying to make the sport move to a mainstream scenario, really makes for something that is not great optics. It doesn't look great. People think of bodybuilding, for example. People are thinking just a load of juice heads. They don't even consider it a real sport in a lot of scenarios. Think just a load of people who take a load of steroids and pose on stage, and this optic for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is something that is at risk here. If all of the athletes use performance-enhancing drugs in this scenario, eventually you'll have outliers who look incredibly juicy. For example, from ADCC, a big aspect of this among a lot of people would have pinpointed was Andre Galvao looked incredibly juicy. A lot of individuals suggest that he should probably do a bodybuilding competition post his ADCC fight with Gordon Ryan. So this optics from the outside, when we're trying to get new individuals involved, doesn't look great. If everyone assumes that everyone in BJJ is using performance-enhancing drugs, which, make no mistake, there is a lot of use of performance-enhancing drugs in BJJ, it's incredibly poor for the optics and the uptake of the sport and would ultimately stunt the growth of the sport. This brings us on nicely to the point of the position it puts our younger athletes in when they are in a position where they want to go all the way with their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu career. If, for example, we have individuals who are in their mid-teens at the moment, they've been doing Jiu-Jitsu for potentially several years at this stage. The sport is relatively new in terms of competition scene. If you look at things like weightlifting and soccer, we're literally 2 centuries ago or 100 plus years ago in terms of our sport developing. So it's relatively new for individuals to see this. And with the recent increase in social media, what we'll have is younger athletes looking at these clearly juiced up athletes, clearly athletes who are on a load of performance-enhancing drugs. They'll see that the vast majority of these athletes are on performance-enhancing drugs if they're able to kind of deduce that, or if someone informs them of this unfortunate fact. Puts them in a scenario where they will think that they have to take performance-enhancing drugs even if they might not need to. The unfortunate reality is, though, is if everyone else is on performance-enhancing drugs, these young individuals will at some point have to take performance-enhancing drugs. And if we know anything about teenage boys especially, but all teenagers, we'll know they're very vulnerable to outside pressure and also make fucking stupid decisions very routinely. So when you have two of these: poor decision-making ability, unable to plan for a future, a lack of consequence for future selves, and then an influence by often bad actors in relation to coaches or peers who may have made that decision, very easily influenced in the use of performance-enhancing drugs, coupled with the fact that they do have to take performance-enhancing drugs to go and compete at these international events at this stage. So they're unfortunately pressured both by decisions of their peers and themselves, by the optics of the sport, and by the sad reality is that they do have to go take those PEDs to get somewhere, because it's not possible at a certain stage with a certain level of development of the sport to compete with people who are on performance-enhancing drugs when the individuals are not. Finally, I'd like to just point out that BJJ doesn't need performance-enhancing drugs to be a visually aesthetic sport and to be an entertaining sport. BJJ is all about who you're rolling with. The quality of who you're rolling with depends on the level of competition. For example, in weightlifting, we're in a position now where we can't go back. We can't go to a level where someone clean and jerking 220 kilos at 180 kilos is a massive lift when we've seen someone snatch 5 kilos more. We can't go back to a stage where 90 kilo men are, clean and jerking 220 to win the Olympics, clean and jerking 200 kilos to win the Olympics. We can't go back to that. Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, however, doesn't have this problem. There is no objective measurement of progress or long-term historical record. It's the quality of your opponent that dictates this. So if everyone didn't use performance-enhancing drugs, no one would need to use performance-enhancing drugs. So if the absence of performance-enhancing drugs is there, it's who you're rolling with. And we know there's a lot of fantastic people who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who have never used performance-enhancing drugs and provide for great entertainment. However, if you get to a stage where someone is both technically supreme and someone else is technically perfect, the difference in power and speed and strength and ability to train more will make the difference in the competition. So if we're in a scenario where everyone is with their general base talents and we're not these super physiological talents, we don't need it. We can still have entertaining jiu-jitsu without the use of performance-enhancing drugs. There could be an argument as well is that we'd see higher levels of technicality, especially in stuff like no-gi or gi as well, where we might see more tactical matches which are more entertaining, which require more strategy and skill, rather than two behemoths smashing into each other. I don't believe anything I said there, but it sounds like a good argument. So obviously, as we said, you guys, everyone watching knows myself and Fitz's opinion on the use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports. But it is an interesting case, and BJJ is an interesting position right now for its development in the sport and its kind of lifetime. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but I think we all know how it's going because it's how it is right now, and I don't ever see testing being engaged. And hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Let us know who you thought provided a more compelling argument. I hope I appealed to everyone's inner mother. I think I did a good job of appealing to everyone's inner mother. I think, like, if there's some mothers listening to this in the background, don't watch this while you're eating lunch, because your mother, BJJ is all hurting yourself and taking steroids. I have one more point to add. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, someone uses more performance-enhancing drugs. They can produce more force, and when we're going for certain joint locks especially, our potential for egregious injury is much higher. If we have more force production, more power production, we can lock something on faster, much faster than someone can tap. For example, recently we've seen quite a few foot and shins being absolutely destroyed when an individual is not given enough time to tap, due to the absolute increase in explosive speed and power that an individual who is on performance-enhancing drugs can use. So we would see most likely more egregious injuries, potentially career-ending injuries for certain people.
Oh, that's a lot of damage!
So that's something to bear in mind. Now, for all the moms listening. Thanks guys for watching.